What does the pine cone represent? Why is that shown around the world? But more importantly, what does the handbag symbol represent that we see all around the world? This knowledge was kept only in the most high levels with priests and magi. Only those at the top could understand what these meant. Many of these ancient symbols throughout history were eventually inverted and perverted to their opposite meanings. In some cases, to almost demonize them, to seem like it's something that's evil when it's truly something that's the complete opposite. These individuals, they are the keepers of knowledge and the keepers of how to create civilizations. They're the ones that jump-started every major advanced, sophisticated civilization we can around the world. I really think this is going to help connect a lot of these missing pieces for people that are yearning for this knowledge. So I want to give just a tiny little bit of a background, because I know that not everybody that comes to this information is at the same level. You know, they haven't necessarily studied this for years and years and years. Maybe they're just discovering this for the first time. So what I want to do is just give a really small, very short, higher level and lower level perspective of this before we really get into what we're talking about. Because I feel like this information specifically is at the highest level. It's not something you just jump right into and start talking about, or you're going to get a lot of people that haven't studied it roll their eyes and turn this video off and say, I don't know what he's talking about. So I want to set the stage for what this information is and why it's so important. Over the last couple of years, the last several years of studying this and writing books and trying to understand the earliest point of when civilization started here, there was always these questions that came up, questions revolving around, what are those cylinder seals that have been found in ancient Mesopotamia? What do they represent? What do these murals represent with all these depictions from the past? What are these ancient symbols we find in places like in the Americas, all the way into Turkey, down into Egypt, down into Mesopotamia? Why do we find the same symbols shared by so many different cultures around the world, when in our history books we're taught that those cultures had no contact with one another, especially across oceans? They were disconnected from different time periods in history, and it's all just random, right? Human civilizations emerged just based on randomness. Some group of kings and group of hunter-gatherers got together, they decided to settle on a location, and then they built an empire, and then that empire eventually collapsed. And that's the whole story we're given. We're told this entire narrative of our civilization can be put into this 6,000 year window with just enormous amounts of slaves being forced into manual labor to create these enormous structures like the pyramids. This is the version we're told. Moving these enormous blocks on these wooden pillars and all these things, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. This old narrative and paradigm that we're taught about how human civilizations got created, how old they are, what the knowledge and the information that was handed down to them, where did it come from? All of these things are starting to become much more in the forefront of conversations. And we're not there yet. A lot of society is still sleeping and believes this narrative that we're told that I just described, this very simplistic narrative that really does govern our lives. If we think that we're just primitive apes that have no connection to the stars, and we have no understanding of what we really are, this higher vibrational being that is a co-conscious creator of this reality around us. If they don't have that perspective, think about how that governs their lives. So that's why I think this information is so important. What we're going to do today is we're going to answer some very, very important questions that are just sort of sifting around and floating around the internet that I get emails and I get questions all the time from people. They'll ask me, what do the Anunnaki look like? Are they reptilian? Are they serpent-headed? What does the pine cone represent? Why is that shown around the world? But more importantly, what does the handbag symbol represent that we see all around the world? What do they really represent? We got to start with symbolism, because that's the biggest piece of this to understand. Now, for those who have followed my work for the last few years, who have read my latest book, The Stage of Time, they know that I discuss the symbols of the eagle and serpent extensively. discuss how it's not really supposed to be a literal translation. In Mesopotamia, when we find this depiction of a serpent-headed individual, it's very easy to want to jump on that and say that's a reptilian being. Very easy to jump on that. And I don't want to throw anybody to the bus and say that you're wrong, but I want to explain my side and my take on how that explains what that means. When you have something serpent-headed, just like when it's described like in the Code of Hammurabi, black-headed, we're talking about symbolism that's shown what someone's mentality is. That's why when we have depictions of some of the Anunnaki, they have an eagle head. They didn't really have eagle heads, and they didn't really have serpent heads. It was a symbolic way to describe their mentality. If their mentality is focused on governing through war and control and the masculine energy of creation, that symbol was always shown through the symbol of the eagle. That's what that symbol meant. And the serpent always represented knowledge and wisdom. So in that case, it really wasn't a scary image with that serpent headed. It actually represented very knowledgeable, a being that was very, very smart, very knowledgeable, not like the society around them, the farmers, the ones who were fishing, the common man. Back then, those types of people didn't understand any of this. This knowledge was kept only in the most high levels with priests and magi. Only those at the top could understand what these meant. Yes, the eagle and the serpent are some of the most important symbols that we have, but these two that we're about to talk about may be the most important two, because they really represent the totality of all of this. So what you have in front of you is a lot of different images all thrown together, a collage of images together here. And I wanted to just break some of these down and show you guys this as we're going along. Now, the images at the top part of the screen and the left part, these are depictions of the Anunnaki, okay? And that's essentially, those three are the Anunnaki themselves. And we'll get into a little bit more about why they look different. But I mentioned the mentality symbolism with the head thing. That image with the eagle head is Ninurta. It's an ancient god of war. That's why it has an eagle head. Ninurta was known as basically the major influencer of the Roman Empire. And you can find that with Ninurta's symbol right there. You'll see it with the Byzantine double-headed eagle. And I showed that on the last image on the rock shown in the background. That represented having awareness and knowing everything about all around you. So having something look left and right, meaning would be knowing all, but not knowing in a knowledge sense, being aware of everything, knowing what everyone's doing, being one step ahead of them. This was the Ninurta symbol. Now, what you'll see though, even in that case, being an eagle-headed mentality that I described, they have this symbol of a pine cone in their hand nearly every time. They're holding that pine cone and pointing in a certain direction. And as we go along, looking at these specific murals from Mesopotamia that I'm going to be talking about, which reference either kings or the Anunnaki, I want people to remember what you're looking at, everything has meaning. Every little curl, every little mark, every single thing they put in these designs means something. That's what's so fascinating about it. I've literally stared at some of these for hours and hours on end, just try to figure out what they're representing. So what I'm showing here, essentially, just to break it down, is these Anunnaki individuals, these figures, are holding a pine cone. They're always facing it forward in front of them. Now, when you go to the Vatican in Rome, where the Pope stands out and comes out and gives all those commandments and talks to everybody, what you find in the square is a giant pine cone symbol, the largest in the entire world, sitting in the center of their religious establishment there. This enormous pine cone, okay? At the same time, the Pope on his staff has a pine cone built right into the wood itself. You can see that depicted down the bottom, as well as a hat that he wears called the mitre hat. Now, when you look into the story of the Dogon, the ancient tribe that's in western Africa in the country of Mali, you find out that this Dogon tribe had all of this knowledge about the stars and the heavens way before the first telescopes were ever invented, before they ever had influences from other cultures. You just had this remote tribe in the middle of the Western Africa that had knowledge about the heavens that literally no one had knowledge of at that time. or very few select groups. And so when French anthropologists first came over to meet them in the 1930s, they couldn't understand how this tribe knew the detailed alignments and celestial movements of Sirius A, B, and even C. And Sirius B hadn't even been discovered yet. It wasn't discovered for years and years later until the first radio telescopes were made. And this culture somehow knew vast amounts of knowledge about our cosmos and about our planet as well. And the reason I say that, I bring up that story, is that if you look at depictions of the Dogon that they have, they show this aquatic serpent-like fish being known as Awanas. And Awanas has a hat on in those depictions. And that hat is where the mitre hat came from. And Awanas is passing on that knowledge in these depictions to these Dogon people. So when you look at the Pope today, it's simply just a reference from these ancient knowledge bringers that passed along knowledge. And Awanas wasn't really an aquatic fish being. It was just a symbol to represent Enki. And when you look at cylinder seals of Enki, you see that he essentially has these fish coming down through above him, and he's basically in charge of the god of freshwater and balance. And so all these things that we see today in these corrupted religious establishments and these inverted truths of these symbols, they all go back to a much more ancient time before they really became inverted to their opposite meanings, just like something like the swastika. All those things were either inverted or hidden so that we no longer understood what they are. The pine cone is absolutely, it's all around the world. We find it in Hindu cultures. We find it in Egyptian cultures. We find it all around the world. As we're going to get into in a second. We know that the pine cone represented knowledge, the passing of knowledge and wisdom. We know that. The pine cone represented both our third eye, the pineal gland within the human brain, as well as it represented this honeycomb hexagonal design, the seeds of life, the seeds of knowledge that represented basically this intelligent design behind all of nature itself. So they decided to use, of any symbol in the entire world, the pine cone represented the passing of knowledge and wisdom. And that's why it's shown being pushed in front of themselves and being handed to other cultures. What's important about us establishing that is that we can then take that understanding and apply it to other symbols because they're related. And that's how this works, is we can take related symbols and allow us to help us expand to understand what they all mean. The pine cone and the handbag is literally shared by every single area in the world. We can establish that there were what we find evidence for lost civilizations. And that's why this is so important, because these symbols that we find in all these different parts of the world, where we also have megalithic structures and sophisticated things that were built that would have been impossible for a primitive culture with Bronze Age tools, we find these same symbols. And that's what's so important about defining them, because it allows us to say, that's who influenced them to create those civilizations. And that's why they're so similar to others. What we have on the screen is probably the most debated of all of the symbols that exist today, is the symbol of the handbag. Now, I will fully admit, when I first started studying this, I thought it was some kind of a bag that maybe held psychedelics, to like psilocybin or something, to help expand some culture's mind or something when they're in a church. I couldn't understand, well, what is in that bag? What are they providing? And there's been so many individuals have said, well, it represents technology, some kind of technology they had that helped them to build the civilization. And this is where I've come to, and this is where I want to try to lay down the definition I think makes the most sense to connect with the pineal gland. And it's going to make more sense as we go along, because we have depictions with all of them together in the next coming slides. So we'll put all this together in one place. So the handbag symbol has been shown in almost every single place that we have megalithic lost civilization imagery and structures around the world. We find these symbols. This handbag. Now on the left side is Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. So we see the same handbag symbol there, and that's in Turkey. Now the image in the middle is one of these Anunnaki images with him with the pine cone holding it out, and then the handbag down below. The following one on the right is from Mexico, La Venta, Mexico, with the Olmec. And you can see Kukulkan Quetzalcoatl up behind him with essentially an Olmec individual with a head of a serpent as well, like serpent headed, remember, holding and passing along a handbag. So what does this mean? What does it really represent? Well, think about what the previous symbol represented: the passing of knowledge. Okay, the passing of knowledge to another individual, not just generic knowledge, higher knowledge of everything. If you were to try to sit down and explain to someone everything, to have them understand from a higher level, understand the balance of nature, understand consciousness, energy, understand the cosmos, understand how to create a civilization. All of these things come into, that's what's needed for an individual to be able to do what they've done throughout history in these empires. So what did the handbag represent then? The handbag was the tools needed to create a civilization. So if you sit down with someone and you are passing the pine cone of knowledge, you're just telling them something. You're telling them knowledge. You're having them understand, like what I just described, the nature of reality, understanding energy, all those things.
Yeah.